You really think life has left her broken? The words lingered in Ethan Carter's mind even as he adjusted the cuff of his crisp white shirt and sipped his wine, the sound of crystal clinking against porcelain echoing through the private dining room of La Belle Étoile, one of New York City's most exclusive Michelin-Star restaurants, where the soft amber glow of hanging pendant lights pooled on polished oak tables and the subtle aroma of roasted truffle and fresh herbs drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the faint hum of quiet conversations and the gentle clatter of cutlery. Across the room, Clara Bennett entered with an understated grace, her emerald green silk dress catching the light as she moved, the fabric flowing over her figure with quiet elegance, heels clicking softly on the marble floor, and for a split second, Ethan's mind froze, the smug expression he had been rehearsing for weeks faltering as his eyes followed her every step, noting the calm, deliberate sway of her shoulders, the way her fingers rested lightly on the clutch she held, and the serene confidence in her gaze that suggested she owned this space without demanding attention, a stark contrast to the nervous energy he had prepared to display as he flaunted his new life and his date's carefully chosen ensemble, all designed to provoke jealousy or pity. He leaned back, forcing a practiced smile as Clara approached the table, feeling the subtle shift in the air as she walked past, the quiet murmur of nearby diners drawing her into the center of the room without a word spoken, a presence that was impossible to ignore, and yet she said nothing, simply sliding into the chair with a poise that radiated control, her deep blue eyes meeting Ethan's for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition passing between them, and he thought he saw a shadow of the woman he once knew, now tempered by 5 years of rebuilding, 5 years of quiet victories, of learning to move with strength rather than react with fear. The waiter placed the first course in front of them, the soft clink of silverware punctuating the tense silence, and Ethan tried to fill the space with small talk, comments about the restaurant, the chef, the ambience, anything that might provoke a reaction, a laugh, a sign of discomfort, but Clara only nodded politely, her lips pressed together in a controlled smile that hid the storm beneath, the tiny twitch at the corner of her eye the only indication of emotion, and as he spoke, she recalled the night spent alone in her apartment, candlelight flickering against the walls as she reviewed recipes, notes, and plans, building a quiet world away from his shadow, a sanctuary that had become her strength, and now, sitting across from him, she felt that power in every measured breath, every subtle gesture, the weight of past humiliation balanced by the calm certainty of survival. Ethan's words fell flat, each syllable echoing too loudly in the room, the tension palpable to anyone attuned to it, and Clara's mind wandered briefly to the memory of Julian Hartman, the man who had shown her a life of purpose and belief, whose soft but unwavering guidance had helped her step into her own, shaping her confidence, his presence lingering in thought like a protective shield. And she met Ethan's gaze with nothing but quiet composure, a controlled fire that promised retribution without spectacle, the ultimate display of power and restraint. As the dinner continued, the conversation a hollow echo of old dynamics, the wine untouched, the candles reflecting in her eyes, and for Ethan, a creeping realization that the woman he had dismissed, the one he had assumed powerless, was not only unbroken but untouchable in a way he could not yet comprehend. And in that silent, charged space, Clara Bennett reasserted her presence, her triumph muted but unmistakable, a masterclass in quiet authority, setting the stage for the reveal that would leave him utterly speechless. Clara took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the soft scent of fresh herbs and seared truffle fill her senses as she straightened her posture, recalling the countless hours she had spent in her apartment, measuring, chopping, and perfecting every recipe with Julian Hartman, whose quiet encouragement had become a steady rhythm in her life, guiding her from uncertainty to mastery. And as she adjusted the delicate fold of her emerald silk dress, she felt a surge of calm determination, the kind that only comes from years of rebuilding from the ashes, each step toward the table a testament to her resilience, the low hum of conversation around her fading into a background murmur, her focus narrowing to the precise moment she would claim her space with quiet authority, the clink of silverware and soft laughter a mere backdrop to the internal clarity she now carried, and in her mind, she revisited the first time Julian had shared a simple secret about flavor balance, the way his hands moved with precision, the warmth of his guidance wrapping around her like a protective layer, teaching her that patience and observation often speak louder than words, and that confidence is cultivated not through display but through mastery. As the waiter approached with a tray of carefully plated amuse-bouche, She noted the subtle presentation of each dish, a visual echo of the skill and discipline that Julian had instilled in her, her fingers brushing lightly over the table edge as if drawing strength from the solid oak beneath, and as Ethan glanced up again, attempting to gauge her reaction, Clara allowed a small, controlled smile, one that conveyed recognition of past wrongs but refrained from engagement, a smile that carried the weight of dignity and quiet power. And she recalled the evening spent late in her kitchen, the soft glow of the pendant light above illuminating the steam rising from a simmering sauce, Julian guiding her hand with a gentle suggestion, the smell of fresh basil mingling with the crisp scent of citrus, creating a sensory memory that anchored her resolve, and now, sitting across from Ethan, she felt the invisible threads of those moments coalesce into presence, a calm command of the space around her, knowing that her preparation, her growth, and her patience had led to this precise instant, the low hum of the restaurant, the gentle flicker of candlelight, the soft clinking of glasses all synchronizing with the quiet intensity of her gaze, every small detail affirming that she was no longer defined by his past judgments or dismissive smirks, and as she reached for the menu with deliberate care, observing each item without haste, her mind stayed centered on the rhythm of her own heartbeat, the lessons of resilience and the subtle, enduring influence of Julian's mentorship, understanding that the real power lay not in confrontation but in the unshakable calm she now possessed, and as the server moved to take their order, Clara's hand rested lightly on the table, her touch intentional and poised, the air around her charged with the silent assertion of her regained agency, each breath measured, each glance precise, every motion a quiet declaration that the woman sitting across from Ethan was fully aware, fully capable, and fully present, carrying the sum of her recovery, her mastery, and her quiet confidence, a presence that spoke volumes without a single word, preparing the stage for the inevitable moment when the truth of her life, her achievements, and the extraordinary talents of her husband would shift the balance irrevocably in her favor. As the main course was served, the soft clatter of cutlery and gentle hum of conversation seemed to fade into the background, Clara Bennett's attention fixed entirely on the subtle shift in the room as Julian Hartman approached from the side, his presence quietly commanding, the crisp white chef's coat tailored perfectly to his frame, and the faint aroma of his signature sauces and herbs trailing behind him, signaling not only his skill but his stature in the culinary world, the kind of recognition that could transform any ordinary dining experience into an event of note, and as Julian stepped closer to the table, Clara's emerald silk dress catching the candlelight, the polished oak and marble surfaces reflecting a quiet elegance, Ethan Carter's smug composure faltered, a subtle tightening of his jaw betraying the sudden awareness that he had underestimated the woman sitting across from him, the one he had once assumed powerless, and as Julian introduced himself to the diners nearby with a modest yet confident grace, his accolades whispered discreetly into the attentive ears of the maitre d' and the sommelier, the realization slowly dawned on Ethan, the shock visible in the sudden pause of his gestures and the hitch in his breath, that this was no ordinary companion, no mere socialite or casual acquaintance, but a man whose culinary empire and reputation had garnered international acclaim, a Michelin-Star chef whose talents and influence extended far beyond the walls of this restaurant, commanding respect and admiration wherever he went, and Clara, fully aware of the shift, allowed a small, controlled smile to play across her lips, her posture relaxed yet radiating quiet authority, eyes meeting Ethan's with a calm assertion that she was no longer the woman who had been diminished by his careless words, whose life had been disregarded and whose ambitions had been dismissed. She was now an equal, a partner to someone whose mastery and presence reshaped the entire room, and as Julian took his seat beside her, the subtle exchange of glances, the understated support, and the aura of competence communicated more than words ever could. Ethan's attempt to interject with a light joke fell flat, the laugh catching in his throat as diners turned subtly to take note, the weight of the moment pressing upon him, the elegance of the space, the glint of crystal, the muted shimmer of candlelight all emphasizing the stark contrast between past assumptions and present reality, Clara's hand resting lightly on the table. Fingers gently aligned with the silverware, the quiet rhythm of her breathing conveying control and certainty, the soft murmur of admiration for Julian's presence reaching her ears yet never breaking her focus, and in that charged atmosphere, Ethan could not deny the full scope of Clara's transformation, her mastery of poise and dignity, the power inherent in her calm confidence, and as the dessert was presented, a delicate arrangement of chocolate, fruit, and edible flowers reflecting Julian's Signature precision and artistry, the moment crystallized, every detail affirming the truth that Clara Bennett had not only reclaimed her life but had done so with such quiet elegance and unassailable presence that the man who had once dismissed her now sat in stunned silence, the air between them heavy with recognition of her unspoken triumph, and Clara, side by side with Julian, allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction, a recognition that victory had never required words, only the strength to rebuild, to rise, and to stand fully in the light of her own accomplishments, the soft glow of candlelight on her dress and Julian's calm demeanor creating a tableau of earned respect and undeniable presence, leaving Ethan to comprehend, belatedly, that the woman he had underestimated had become untouchable, her power manifest in the grace with which she navigated the room, the subtle acknowledgement of her growth, and the unspoken message that she was no longer defined by the past, but by the life she had deliberately and brilliantly constructed. The soft murmur of conversation continued around them, the ambient light from the crystal chandeliers casting gentle patterns on the polished marble floor, and Clara Bennett remained poised, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly on the table as she allowed Julian Hartman to engage with the sommelier, his calm authority radiating through every gesture, his knowledge of wines and pairings commanding attention without a hint of arrogance, while Ethan Carter shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the earlier confidence in his demeanor replaced by a tentative unease as he began to notice the subtle respect and admiration Julian inspired among the staff and the diners alike. Each word Julian spoke measured, precise, filled with quiet command, a stark contrast to Ethan's strained attempts at charm, and Clara felt a sense of serene satisfaction, knowing that her years of effort, her deliberate cultivation of patience, skill, and confidence, had brought her to this precise moment, where she could exist fully in her own right without the need to argue, explain, or justify, and she allowed her gaze to wander briefly around the room, noting the delicate arrangements of flowers, the gleam of polished silverware, and the attentive glances of the guests as Julian casually engaged with them, his warmth and competence subtly highlighting the depth of her life now. A life constructed with intention and care, separate from the past and fully realized. And as dessert was cleared, the soft clatter of plates punctuating the muted conversation, Clara sipped her water, her eyes meeting Ethan's across the table, a silent communication passing between them, one of composed triumph and unshakable calm, and Ethan could not help but register the shift, the palpable authority she now exuded, the way the room itself seemed to recognize her presence, the unspoken acknowledgement of her evolution over the past years, and Clara allowed herself a brief smile. The kind that required no words, no drama, only the quiet, undeniable power of presence, the room responding subtly to her energy, and Julian returned, a folded menu in hand, discussing the next courses with a tactful ease that drew attention and admiration, the diners around them subtly leaning in to listen, unaware of the history at the table, unaware of the carefully orchestrated balance of control and poise that Clara now commanded, and she observed Ethan's restrained reaction, the small twitch of a hand, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, each motion speaking louder than any spoken word, a reminder that the past assumptions had been shattered not through confrontation but through the deliberate accumulation of skill, knowledge, and presence, and as the soft lighting accentuated the emerald of her dress and the quiet composure of her movements, Clara allowed a sense of deep satisfaction to settle, not in vengeance or malice, but in the serene acknowledgement of her own growth and success, the mastery of her domain, the subtle orchestration of the evening's events, and the careful timing of her appearance and demeanor, all converging to leave an impression that spoke volumes without uttering a single challenge. As the final moments of the dinner unfolded, Clara sat with quiet confidence, her gaze steady, her composure impeccable, the soft reflection of candlelight on her dress and Julian's calm, commanding presence creating a tableau that rendered Ethan's earlier arrogance insignificant, the room itself a witness to the unspoken assertion of power and dignity, and Clara Bennett, side by side with Julian Hartman, allowed herself to simply exist in this space, fully present, fully aware, her triumph neither loud nor boastful, yet undeniable, every measured breath, every deliberate gesture, every quiet glance affirming that she had not only survived but had fully reclaimed the authority and respect that were always her due. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected off the polished surfaces of the dining room as Clara Bennett and Julian Hartman rose from the table, their movements synchronized with a quiet grace that drew subtle attention from the surrounding guests, and as they walked toward the exit, the low hum of conversation seemed to shift, the air charged with the unspoken acknowledgement of their presence. Julian's calm authority and Clara's composed confidence creating a magnetic effect, while Ethan Carter, still seated, felt an uncharacteristic hesitation, the carefully maintained facade of control wavering as he observed the seamless poise with which Clara navigated the space, each step deliberate, each gesture understated yet resonant with quiet power, and she could feel the gentle ripple of attention, the subtle glance from a nearby sommelier, the almost imperceptible nod from a waiter who recognized Julian's reputation, and all of it reflected back on her, a testament to the life she had cultivated, the patience, the resilience, and the mastery of her own presence. As they approached the private foyer, the warm tones of polished wood and brass fixtures framing their path, Clara allowed herself a moment to inhale, to appreciate the carefully orchestrated symmetry of light and space, the tactile smoothness of the handrail beneath her fingers, the soft resonance of their footsteps against the marble floor. And as they passed through the door into the quiet of the evening, the city skyline spread before them in a tapestry of lights. The distant sounds of traffic and urban life forming a muted symphony. Clara's thoughts drifted briefly to the years of dedication, the nights spent refining her skills in the kitchen alongside Julian, learning the precision and artistry that now radiated subtly in her demeanor, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her life had been built deliberately, with intention, and not left to the whims of others. And as they reached the car, a sleek, black vehicle waiting curbside, the reflection of neon signs and lamplight glinting on its surface, Clara's gaze returned to the restaurant, to the space where earlier tension had met her steadfast composure, and she realized that the power she carried was not in confrontation but in the quiet reclamation of her own narrative, a presence that spoke volumes without a single word. And as Julian opened the door for her, the gentle hum of the city brushing against the silence of the interior, she stepped in with deliberate poise, the familiar scent of polished leather and a hint of cedar greeting her, and as the car moved smoothly into the evening traffic, Clara allowed herself a deep, controlled breath, feeling the steady pulse of accomplishment, the serene satisfaction of triumph achieved through calm authority, mastery, and unshakable dignity, and Ethan Carter's earlier assumptions, once so certain and dismissive, now seemed fragile and inconsequential, a memory of past misunderstandings rendered irrelevant by the quiet brilliance of Clara's presence, every detail of the evening a reinforcement of her strength, her measured steps, her composed gaze, and the enduring assertion of her identity, fully realized, fully acknowledged, and entirely untouchable as she sat beside Julian, the night stretching ahead like an open canvas, full of possibility and the quiet affirmation of a life reclaimed. The city light streamed through the windows of the moving car, casting long reflections across the leather seats as Clara Bennett leaned back, feeling the steady rhythm of Julian Hartman's presence beside her, a quiet anchor against the whirlwind of the evening, and as the streets of New York unfolded beneath them, the gentle vibration of the tires over asphalt seemed to mirror the controlled beat of her own heartbeat, steady and deliberate, each breath measured, a reminder of the composure she had cultivated over years of navigating both loss and opportunity, her thoughts drifting briefly to the earlier moments in the restaurant, the subtle glances exchanged with waitstaff who now recognized Julian's reputation, the gentle nods of respect that had silently acknowledged her presence, and she allowed herself a quiet satisfaction, a recognition of how far she had come from the woman who once felt invisible in her own life, the way Ethan Carter had dismissed her, the way she had been underestimated, all fading into the memory of a past now irrelevant, a backdrop against which her current reality glowed with calm authority and understated triumph, and Julian, sensing her reflection inward, reached for her hand, the lightest of touches that carried warmth, support, and mutual understanding, a reminder that her strength was not merely solitary but enriched by partnership, his words soft, almost conversational, discussing the intricacies of the evening service and the delicate presentation of flavors in the tasting menu. And Clara listened, absorbing not only his technical mastery but the way he had shaped her confidence, each lesson in patience and precision reinforcing her own poise, her gaze drifting momentarily to the skyscrapers outside, their windows glowing like constellations mirrored in the river below, the city alive yet subdued in its nighttime rhythm, and she thought of the layers of her life that had rebuilt themselves with intention, each choice deliberate, each step toward autonomy measured, the quiet victories stacking invisibly but powerfully to form the foundation of the woman sitting here now, fully present, fully aware, and entirely in control of the narrative, and as Julian spoke of future projects, opportunities for collaboration, and the subtle nuances of culinary presentation, Clara's mind sharpened, noting how the lessons in his kitchen had transcended food, shaping strategy, foresight, and confidence. A skill set invisible to outsiders but palpable in the way she moved through the space with unwavering self-possession, and as the car slowed near her apartment. The familiar scent of polished wood and the soft hum of the building's lobby welcomed her, reinforcing the sense of safe dominion she had created around herself, the past failures and dismissals no longer defining her, merely lessons embedded in the foundation of her resilience, and as she stepped from the car, Julian's hand brushing lightly over hers, the world seemed to acknowledge her arrival, the weight of expectation replaced by the quiet, undeniable presence she had earned, every gaze. Every subtle motion of the staff, and even the passing pedestrians outside reflecting the unspoken authority and calm triumph that now enveloped her, a reminder that true power and success often arrive silently, through patience, perseverance, and unwavering self-belief. And as Clara Bennett entered her apartment, the city lights casting a glow on the walls, she exhaled fully, embracing the stillness of the moment, the assurance that the life she had deliberately built, the dignity she had meticulously restored, and the quiet mastery of her presence had irrevocably shifted the balance, leaving the past behind and opening the door to a future defined not by others' judgments but by the full spectrum of her own capabilities and the serene triumph of her journey. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Clara Bennett's apartment, casting a soft glow over the polished hardwood floors and the subtle shimmer of the emerald silk dress she had set aside the night before, and as she moved through the space, the quiet hum of the city below serving as a muted backdrop, her mind replayed the previous evening with a clarity that both surprised and satisfied her, each interaction, each measured step, the way Julian Hartman had guided conversations and movements with effortless grace, all intertwining to create an evening that had shifted the balance in ways she had long envisioned, and she paused at the small breakfast table by the window, the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the soft scent of citrus from a bowl of fruit, allowing herself a slow, deliberate inhale, the rhythm of her breathing grounding her in the present while the memories of carefully orchestrated gestures, subtle glances, and quiet displays of authority replayed vividly, the realization settling in that she had not needed confrontation or spectacle to assert her presence, her influence, or her dignity, and the thought of Ethan Carter, his earlier arrogance now tempered by observation, a shadow of understanding flickering in his eyes during the dinner, brought a faint smile to her lips, a smile born not of triumph over him but of recognition of her own growth and self-possession, and she allowed her gaze to drift over the small details of her apartment, the light catching the edges of polished surfaces, the soft texture of the area rug beneath her feet, the carefully curated arrangement of books and decorative objects that spoke silently of her independence and taste, each element a testament to the life she had rebuilt, a life filled with intention and quiet mastery. And as Julian entered from the adjoining kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of coffee with effortless balance, his calm demeanor and steady presence a familiar anchor, she felt the full measure of the partnership that had nurtured her resurgence, a partnership built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared understanding of skill and purpose. And as he set the mugs down before her, their fingers briefly touching in a gesture of understated connection, the city beyond the window seemed to pause, the usual rush of noise and movement reduced to a gentle murmur, emphasizing the stillness of their moment, the quiet strength that radiated from Clara, the culmination of years of patience, resilience, and deliberate growth, and she looked out at the skyline, the reflection of sunlight glinting off glass towers, imagining the lives unfolding in countless apartments and offices, and in that vision, she recognized the distinction between those who lived defined by circumstance and those, like herself, who shaped their own narrative with intention, and as Julian spoke softly, describing the plans for a new culinary venture and the careful considerations that would guide their next steps, Clara felt a deep, measured confidence, the kind that comes from knowing that the past, with all its dismissals, underestimations, and quiet pain, no longer dictated her present, and that every subtle choice, every deliberate action, every layer of competence and grace had constructed a life in which she stood fully, unassailable and serene, the air around her carrying the quiet echo of triumph, a triumph defined not by spectacle but by mastery, dignity, and the steady, undeniable assertion of self, and as the city continued to hum beyond the windows, she sat with Julian, both fully present, fully aware. A shared smile acknowledging the life they had cultivated together, and the silent, enduring victory of her journey, unspoken yet unmistakable, settled around them like a soft, encompassing light. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Clara Bennett's apartment, casting a warm glow across the sleek surfaces and reflecting off the subtle metallic accents she had chosen with deliberate care, and as she moved through the living area, the faint hum of the city below created a soft, constant rhythm that blended seamlessly with the gentle clatter of kitchen tools where Julian Hartman was preparing a light snack, the aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with herbs from the small indoor garden lining the windowsill, creating a calm, grounding environment that mirrored the quiet confidence Clara carried within her, and she paused for a moment, allowing herself to take in the intricate details of their shared space, the polished wood of the floors, the carefully selected art adorning the walls, the soft texture of the area rug beneath her feet, all of it a reflection of a life rebuilt with intention, patience, and care, a life that had once been fractured but now radiated subtle authority and calm mastery. And as Julian placed a tray with 2 glasses of sparkling water on the small dining table, his measured movements and the ease with which he navigated the room reminded Clara of the lessons they had learned together, the patience, precision, and quiet discipline that had transformed her perspective and fortified her resolve, and she caught his eye, a small smile passing between them that spoke volumes without words, the unspoken acknowledgement of a shared journey, a partnership that had not only restored her confidence but amplified it. And as she sipped her water, the sunlight illuminating the deep tones of her hair and the gentle curve of her profile, Clara's mind replayed the dinner from the previous night, the subtle but undeniable shift in attention from those around the table, the way Ethan Carter had faltered in his attempts to assert dominance, the careful balance of composure and poise she had maintained, all culminating in the silent triumph that now lingered in the memory, and she allowed herself a quiet breath, the soft click of the kitchen timer and the faint rustle of leaves from the windowsill garden grounding her in the present moment, a reminder that power and success often manifest in quiet, deliberate acts rather than loud declarations. And as Julian spoke softly about the upcoming week, the strategy for new culinary projects, and the subtle nuances of seasonal ingredients, Clara listened attentively, absorbing not just his words but the rhythm, the cadence, the way he translated expertise into gentle guidance and shared confidence, reinforcing the knowledge that her life now was fully her own, shaped by skill, patience, and resilience. And as the city outside shifted with the afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the room, Clara walked toward the small balcony, feeling the cool metal of the railing beneath her fingertips, the distant sounds of traffic and pedestrian movement forming a soft, constant undercurrent to her reflections, and she paused to take a deep breath, the air carrying a mix of concrete, greenery, and subtle city aromas, grounding her in the fullness of her present reality, the life she had deliberately constructed with care, and in that moment, the quiet, confident strength she embodied was more palpable than any external recognition could convey, a presence forged from years of measured steps, deliberate choices, and unwavering self-possession. And as she turned back inside, Julian's calm presence beside her, the soft light reflecting off their shared surroundings, she felt the serene certainty that her journey had not only restored her dignity but had elevated it, every detail of her space, every moment of interaction, and every deliberate act of composure contributing to a life that was unmistakably her own, fully realized. And quietly, yet undeniably, triumphant. The evening descended softly over the city, the skyline aglow with the muted reflection of twilight as Clara Bennett and Julian Hartman stood by the large windows of their apartment, the cool glass beneath their palms grounding them in the quiet stillness that had become a sanctuary after a day filled with carefully orchestrated presence, and Clara's thoughts wandered to the series of subtle gestures, measured words, and deliberate movements that had defined the dinner the night before, the way she had navigated each encounter with unwavering composure, each glance, each smile, each pause infused with quiet authority. And as Julian spoke in a low, even tone about the details of the next culinary venture, describing the balance of flavors, timing, and presentation with precision, Clara felt a deep resonance with his methodical approach, recognizing that the patience and skill he had imparted to her extended beyond the kitchen and into the fabric of her daily life, reinforcing her capacity to act with intention and mastery in any situation. And she allowed herself a brief moment to observe the apartment around them, the light catching the edges of the polished wood and subtly highlighting the textures of their shared furnishings, each object chosen not only for its aesthetic value but for the quiet affirmation of control and discernment it represented. A reflection of the deliberate life she had constructed after years of learning to balance strength with grace, and as Julian's gaze met hers, the acknowledgement passing silently between them, Clara was reminded of the resilience that had brought her to this precise moment, the years spent cultivating confidence, skill, and self-possession, the careful attention to detail that allowed her to command a room, influence perception, and maintain dignity without uttering a word of confrontation. And as the lights from the city shifted with the approach of night, casting subtle shadows across the floor, Clara traced the patterns with her eyes, absorbing the beauty in symmetry, balance, and control, the way small gestures and quiet awareness could resonate powerfully in the environment around her, and she thought of Ethan Carter, the subtle flicker of surprise she had seen in his eyes, the hesitation in his voice when he realized that the woman he had underestimated was now fully realized in authority and presence. And she allowed herself a small, serene smile, not of triumph over him, but as a testament to her own evolution and the deliberate construction of her identity, the careful layering of skill, patience, and mastery that had brought her to a position of quiet command, and as Julian placed a gentle hand over hers, the warmth of the gesture grounding her in the present, the hum of the city below blending with the faint sounds from the kitchen where utensils and ingredients whispered of ongoing creativity, Clara felt the full measure of serenity, the deep knowledge that the life she had painstakingly rebuilt, the identity she had quietly reclaimed, and the partnership she had cultivated now formed an unshakable foundation, a calm yet undeniable force that would guide her through every interaction, every challenge, and every moment of recognition that was yet to come, and in that space, filled with subtle light, measured sound, and deliberate presence, Clara Bennett stood fully realized, fully aware, and quietly triumphant, her past no longer a weight, but a series of lessons woven seamlessly into the mastery and dignity of the woman she had become, every breath, every gesture, every glance a reflection of the life she had deliberately and brilliantly constructed. The soft hum of the city below was a distant, muted rhythm as Clara Bennett adjusted the throw over the back of the sofa, her eyes tracing the faint reflection of the evening lights on the polished floors, each glint of amber and gold casting a warm glow that mirrored the calm assurance she carried within her. And as Julian Hartman moved gracefully around the kitchen, preparing a light snack with measured precision, Clara felt the steady pulse of their shared accomplishments resonate in the quiet space, a harmony of patience, skill, and deliberate intention that had guided them through the challenges of rebuilding her life after years of uncertainty. The aroma of toasted almonds and fresh citrus filling the air, mingling with the subtle scent of polished wood and linen, each detail contributing to the sensory landscape that underscored her mastery of presence and the deliberate cultivation of serenity, and she reflected briefly on the previous week, the dinner where subtle glances and controlled gestures had communicated volumes, the way her composure had shifted the perception of those around her, and particularly Ethan Carter, whose earlier dismissiveness now seemed inconsequential, a shadow of misjudgment overtaken by quiet authority and earned respect. And Clara allowed her gaze to drift across the carefully curated apartment, the soft textures of the rugs and upholstery, the polished edges of furniture, and the arrangement of books and decorative objects, each element reflecting the life she had intentionally constructed, a life of autonomy, purpose, and quiet triumph, and she thought of the years of disciplined practice, the hours spent with Julian learning the nuances of his craft, the patient repetition that had forged her ability to act with intention, confidence, and control in any situation, and as he returned from the counter carrying a tray of beverages, their fingers brushed briefly, a simple gesture of connection, warmth, and mutual acknowledgement, and the city lights outside continued to glimmer, reflecting off the glass surfaces, a visual echo of the accomplishments Clara now owned fully, without the need for external validation, and as she took a sip of her water, her thoughts settled on the subtle but undeniable presence she had established, the way her poise, quiet confidence, and strategic awareness shaped the room without a word, communicating a mastery born of resilience, deliberate growth, and unwavering self-possession, and as Julian spoke softly about upcoming plans, the delicate balance of ingredients, the rhythm of preparation, and the meticulous attention required for perfection, Clara listened intently, absorbing the lessons that extended beyond the kitchen into the fabric of her life, reinforcing the deep-seated knowledge that her success was self-crafted, deliberate, and unassailable, and as she rose to join him by the windows, the skyline stretching endlessly before her, the city lights reflecting like constellations, she allowed herself a moment to inhale, to acknowledge the quiet triumph of reclaiming her space, her presence, and her identity, a victory achieved not through confrontation or spectacle but through the careful, sustained practice of patience, poise, and unwavering control, and in that serene moment, Clara Bennett stood fully aware of her strength, her autonomy, and the subtle, undeniable power of a life rebuilt with intention, every breath, every measured gesture, and every silent acknowledgement of accomplishment forming the foundation of the woman she had become, fully present, fully realized, and quietly triumphant. The evening air carried a soft, lingering warmth as Clara Bennett and Julian Hartman stepped onto the balcony, the city lights twinkling below like a scattered constellation, each building and street glowing with quiet vibrancy, and as she leaned against the railing, feeling the smooth cool metal beneath her fingers, Clara allowed herself to fully absorb the calm and command that now defined her life, the rhythm of the urban landscape harmonizing with the deliberate cadence of her own heartbeat. And she thought back to the dinner, the way each interaction, each glance, each subtle gesture had conveyed more than words ever could, the precision of her movements, the measured poise that had silently asserted her authority and presence, the recognition from the staff, the unspoken acknowledgement from Julian, and even the faint ripple of attention that had reached Ethan Carter, a reminder that influence and power often speak in whispers rather than proclamations, and she watched the reflections of streetlights ripple across the glass windows of nearby towers, the muted glow casting soft patterns across her face, emphasizing the serenity and assurance that had grown from years of careful rebuilding, each moment of patience, each exercise in self-restraint, each step toward autonomy contributing to the woman who now stood fully realized and unwavering, and Julian, standing a step behind her, shifted slightly to offer his presence as a silent support, the warmth of his hand brushing hers momentarily, a reminder that the partnership they shared was built on trust, deliberate action, and mutual respect, reinforcing the confidence and strength she carried, and as she breathed deeply, the faint scent of citrus and fresh herbs from their indoor garden mixing with the cool evening breeze, Clara reflected on the transformation of her life, the distance she had traveled from the days of self-doubt and underestimation, the careful accumulation of skill, composure, and quiet authority, and she realized that the moments that mattered most were the ones unspoken, the moments where presence alone communicated mastery and dignity, the subtle shift in posture, the small but deliberate gestures, the controlled calm in the midst of observation, all of it a testament to the careful cultivation of her own identity, and as Julian spoke softly about plans for the coming week, the new culinary project, and the potential for innovation, Clara listened with a focused awareness, absorbing the rhythm, the meticulous attention to detail, the discipline that mirrored the lessons she had internalized for her own life, and the city stretched endlessly before her, the lights reflecting off windows and water, a soft symphony of urban life underscoring the quiet triumph she now embodied, and Clara Bennett, standing fully beside Julian, allowed herself a gentle exhale, the weight of past judgments and dismissals now irrelevant, replaced by a serene certainty, the unshakable knowledge that every choice, every deliberate action, and every measured movement had built a life of purpose, mastery, and quiet authority, a life that could not be diminished, a presence that required no validation beyond its own calm strength. And as the evening deepened, Clara remained there, eyes tracing the horizon, mind centered in her own mastery, fully aware of her accomplishments, and silently, undeniably, triumphant. The soft glow of the city lights reflected across the glass of the balcony, painting the apartment with a warm, golden hue as Clara Bennett and Julian Hartman stood side by side, the cool metal railing steady beneath her palms and the distant sounds of traffic and urban life forming a quiet, rhythmic background, and Clara allowed her gaze to drift over the horizon, taking in the sparkling towers, the glimmering water beyond, and the movement of countless lives unfolding below, each a contrast to the deliberate, controlled life she had carefully constructed, and as Julian adjusted a small vase of fresh flowers on the balcony ledge, the subtle scent of jasmine mingling with the evening air, she felt a serene clarity, the culmination of years spent rebuilding, strengthening, and cultivating her own presence, the quiet mastery of self-possession radiating in every gesture, every breath, every glance. And she recalled the sequence Of moments that had brought her here, the dinner where measured poise and subtle authority had shifted perception, the acknowledgement, unspoken yet unmistakable, from Ethan Carter, the way the room had responded to her presence, the silent respect and admiration from those who had observed, all weaving together into a quiet triumph that required no proclamation, no validation beyond its own inherent power. And as Julian spoke in a low, thoughtful voice about the upcoming plans for their culinary projects, the balance of flavors, timing, and presentation, Clara absorbed not just his words but the deliberate rhythm, the patience, and meticulous care that mirrored her own journey, reinforcing the understanding that her life had been deliberately and purposefully crafted, each choice, each action, each subtle gesture a testament to resilience and controlled strength, and she let her eyes wander back inside, observing the soft lighting, the carefully curated arrangement of furniture, the polished floors and subtle textures that reflected not only taste but intentionality, a tangible reflection of the careful, quiet work that had defined her resurgence, and as the wind brushed lightly against her hair and the city continued its muted hum, Clara felt the deep, unshakable awareness of her own agency, the knowledge that past doubts, dismissals, and underestimations no longer held sway, the careful layering of skill, patience, and deliberate action giving shape to a life that was undeniably hers, fully realized, and quietly commanding, and as Julian's hand touched hers in a simple, grounding gesture, the warmth and steady presence reinforcing the partnership that had nurtured her transformation, Clara felt the full measure of serenity and accomplishment, a calm triumph born of mastery, dignity, and patience, and she allowed a long, deliberate exhale, the cityscape stretching endlessly beyond, the apartment filled with the subtle, affirming resonance of a life reclaimed, every detail, every breath, every glance a reflection of the woman she had become, fully present, fully aware, and quietly, yet undeniably, triumphant, the culmination of deliberate choices, measured actions, and unwavering self-possession manifest in a moment that was both serene and powerful, a silent declaration of authority and peace that needed no words, no audience. Only the unshakable presence of Clara Bennett standing fully realized alongside Julian Hartman, her journey complete yet alive with infinite possibility. The soft hum of the city at night was a constant, a gentle undercurrent to the peace that Clara Bennett now felt as she stood in the quiet comfort of her apartment, the gentle glow of the lamp casting a warm light over the room, the subtle scent of jasmine and fresh herbs from the windowsill garden mixing with the air, and as Julian Hartman moved through the kitchen, preparing a meal with the same quiet precision that had become second nature to both of them, Clara allowed herself to linger in the moment, taking in the details around her, the soft sheen of polished wood, the comfort of the space she had crafted with intention and care, each piece of furniture, every delicate arrangement, reflecting a life fully realized, and as Julian set the table, his movements fluid and graceful, Clara's mind wandered briefly to the journey that had brought her to this point, the quiet but deliberate steps that had led to a life that was hers and hers alone, no longer defined by the judgment of others but by the calm mastery of her own choices, and she thought of the many moments, small and significant, that had shaped her transformation, the years of learning to navigate the world with poise, the careful cultivation of skill, patience, and inner strength, and now, standing in this space, she could see it all, each choice, each deliberate step, had led her here, to this place of quiet triumph and serene authority, and as she joined Julian at the table, the soft clink of silverware against fine china filling the air, she felt the weight of the evening settle around her, not with the burden of expectation but with the knowledge that she had already achieved what so many could only dream of, a life built on her own terms, and as the meal unfolded before them, each course carefully prepared, each ingredient chosen with precision and care, Clara felt a quiet sense of gratitude, not for the food, though it was exquisite, but for the life she had created, the partnership with Julian, and the calm certainty that her journey had been one of purpose, resilience, and quiet power. And as the evening continued, Clara and Julian shared stories, plans, and laughter, the room filled with the easy rhythm of their connection, and Clara felt fully present, fully at peace, knowing that the life she had built was not just about survival, but about mastery, about living fully and intentionally, and in that moment, she could feel the strength of the journey behind her, the quiet confidence of the woman she had become, and as the city outside carried on with its usual pace, Clara Bennett, side by side with Julian Hartman, simply allowed herself to be, fully, completely, and undeniably, triumphant.